Before we begin, I would just like to thank you all for the support on the last video as we slowly but surely make our way toward our first 1,000 subscribers. Also, do be sure to go and follow my new Twitch channel, link in the description, where I'll be live streaming Season 3 of the Hitman No HUD series. On with the video. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. In today's video, we'll be completing Hitman 2's 5th mission, Another Life, on Master difficulty with suit only, silent assassin fully intact, the entire HUD turned off with no cuts and no saves. The mission is quite simply to eliminate both targets and collect an assortment of intel, and the video will be broken down into 2 stages. The first stage is the plan. This is where I'll be scoping out the level, finding paths and secret passageways, picking up intel and making lots and lots of mistakes. The second stage is the execution. This is where all HUD options will be turned off, and I'll carry out the plan that was designed in stage 1. As always, the loadout for the mission will be the original starting location, 47 signature suit, the ICA goalballer, the lockpick MK3, and 3 coins. Welcome to Supercut, the series where we take an entire Let's Play and condense it into one video. My name is Mr. Supercut, and this is the planning stage of Hitman 2's Another Life. Run 1 saw me start the mission on a direct collision course with my first target, Nolan Cassidy. Of course, there wasn't anything I could do at this point due to being out in the open in an American suburb, but it was good to know he wasn't locked away in an ivory tower, like our second target, Janus. Step 1 was to try and get into the property that Cassidy had come out from, so I hopped the neighbouring fence and shot the camera on the outside of Cassidy's HQ, alerting a guard posted on the upper floor. I took out a second camera, and after determining it was safe to proceed, I hugged the back entrance and for some reason couldn't unlock the door, so climbed up the drain pipe and through the window, getting immediately spotted by another camera. I quickly jumped into the closet and then came to the realisation that the loadout had not saved properly and I wasn't using my standard kit. So with that, I put the correct items in and hit restart. After that silly mistake, I began run 2, this time feeling a lot better with my trusty lockpick in hand. I did the same thing as last time by hopping the neighbouring garden and shooting out the cameras, and then watched as Cassidy left the property, giving me a chance to sneak in through the garage. I switched off a generator and knocked out the investigating guard, dumped his body in the nearby freezer, and then headed into the kitchen, which had been converted into a base of operations. I picked up a surveillance tape off the desk with no concept of what it contained and then destroyed the CCTV cameras. Diana then informed me that the note attached to the tape alluded to another property that Cassidy was storing additional equipment in. In this mission, I had 2 targets and some additional conditions to meet before I could actually exfiltrate the area. I needed to find 3 clues throughout the area that linked Janus to the constant of the secret organisation Providence. I headed back into the garage, switched on the generator, opened the garage door, and unfortunately forgot to remove the rifle from my back, so shot Cassidy and hit restart. In run 3, I managed to knock out 2 guards using the generator whilst Cassidy was still in the house. The first dropped a letter written by Janus which marked one of the clues I needed to find for my mission. After dumping his body and the second guard's body, I picked up the tape and destroyed the CCTV and then headed back into the suburb minus the automatic weapon. I then headed over to the house number 429, which was the property noted on the surveillance tape. I crept into the backyard, climbed up some scaffolding, in through the window and up into the attic space. I placed the surveillance tape into the player and heard a conversation between Janus and the current head of Providence, meaning I now had 2 out of 3 clues required to finish the level. After this, I headed back outside and knocked everyone out and then headed through a conveniently placed gap in the garden fence, taking me directly to Janus's house. I sat in the bushes for a short while, very aware that one wrong move would mean all eyes on me, and so at this moment I decided to save the game. I crept out, knocked out the first guard and dumped his body in the nearby bush, knocked out the second guard and dumped his body in the nearby bush, and then knocked out the final guard and dumped his body in, you guessed it, a dumpster. No, I'm joking, it was a nearby bush. I headed down the stairs and unlocked the door using a set of keys I picked up from somewhere and headed in, knocked out the guard and dumped his body in a nearby bush, a closet, then found another piece of intel which I thought would have been my third and final clue, but apparently not. I refrained from heading up the staircase into the property and instead retraced my steps and decided to enter in from the outside, knocked out the guard and dumped his body in the garage freezer below a pirate's treasure map. I then headed back into the kitchen and noticed Janus coming down the stairs, and after a while of watching this sad old man shuffle through the hallway, he made an excellent point to his personal bodyguard.
Saturday is muffin day, Gunther.
And unfortunately there were no muffins on the table, which made the sad old man very upset.
I'm upset!
I then watched as the decrepit old war criminal headed to the deck in the garden, completely oblivious to 2 things. 1, all of his guards had magically disappeared, and 2, there was a blueberry muffin sat right in front of his face. I headed out and picked it up, then placed it on that silver tray he was previously babbling on about. I then climbed to the upper floor using the drain pipe in the garden and found a reel of microfilm which I had no idea what to do with. I then flooded a tap to distract a nearby guard, allowing me to progress through into a small library with an attic space hiding nothing particularly useful except some rat poison. I then switched on the old gramophone and watched as the senile old man turned into Usain Bolt and sprinted back up the stairs just to listen to a couple of classic tunes. He then shuffled off and I crept into his room and distracted one of the guards, knocked him out and dumped him in the nearby closet. I then used the rat poison to poison Janus's oxygen mask, which seemed a little more sinister than the usual methods of execution, and whilst doing this, Diana informed me that the music I'd played on the gramophone had jogged Janus's memory, causing him to babble incessantly about an upcoming meeting he was going to be having with the Constant. All 3 clues had now been collected, but I still wasn't anywhere close to taking out either of the targets. I knocked out the final guard upstairs and dumped his body in a nearby wardrobe, and then headed downstairs to find Janus in the basement doing absolutely nothing interesting as usual. I headed into his bedroom before he did and hid in the closet and watched him inhale an obscene amount of rat poison instead of his oxygen. I thought I was onto a winner until I found that whilst Janus dashed off to throw up, his bodyguard, Gunther, stayed put. So, just like R. Kelly and Tom Cruise, I really was trapped in the closet.
Ah! Hey! Dude, I'm sorry, I didn't mean it!
Go away!
Eventually, after feeling a lot better, Janus returned and breathed in some nice clean oxygen when his personal nurse turned up at the front door. This run was turning out to be an absolute disaster, but I insisted on carrying on as I was now about 34 minutes deep. I switched on the gramophone again, causing Janus to come and investigate, and of course brought Gunther as well. Enough was enough. I crept in and cracked Gunther across the head and dumped his body in a nearby wardrobe. Now, I could have played it safe by switching on the gramophone again, but of course I'm an idiot by trade, so just waited for the nurse to leave, and then as Janus was walking away, I choked him out and dragged him toward a nearby closet, snapped his neck and dumped his body. After finally taking out my first target, I jumped out of the window, headed through the backyard and across to Cassidy's house, just in time to find one of the guards spot a gun lying on the floor. After Cassidy left, I headed inside in an effort to find something, anything, that would aid in my assassination. I flooded the bathroom sink, knocked out the guard, and unfortunately had nowhere to dump his body. Once Cassidy returned, I switched on the generator in the garage, and neither he nor his personal bodyguard came to investigate, which was highly annoying, and so I climbed to the upper floor from the outside, knocked out a guard, and then 45 minutes into my run, another guard entered the room and spotted the unconscious body, ruining my silent assassin run. I knocked him out and then dumped both bodies into a nearby locker, and then found another attic space, this time containing nothing useful. 47 was obviously our lucky number, so being that many minutes deep into a run, I decided to just end it all by knocking out one guard, stabbing the other, and then stabbing Cassidy. After that, I ran off toward the nearby bus stop, stabbed the nearby postal worker out of pure frustration, hopped on the bus and bussed off into the sunset. Don't worry, the runs couldn't get any worse than that. Or could they? They don't. Spoiler, they don't get any worse than that, okay? You're fine. In run 4, I picked up the tape from the kitchen and popped it into the player in the attic across the street, crept into Janus's garden, knocked out one guard and crept downstairs, knocked out the guard in the basement, dumped his body, picked up the picture frame marking the second clue pickup, considering I didn't pick one up from the bodyguard in Cassidy's house. I crept upstairs, knocked out the guard, and as I was dragging him to the garage, I got spotted doing so, but for some reason just carried on, and once I'd laid him to rest, I then hit restart. In run 5, I picked up the letter for the bodyguard at Cassidy's, along with the tape, popped the tape at the player across the street, went through the basement of Janus's, and as he shimmied into the kitchen, I headed up the main staircase. I picked up the rat poison from the attic and then headed into his bedroom, poisoned his mask, and then scurried across the hallway, knocked out one of the guards and dumped his body, picked up the microfilm and still had no idea where to put it, and then headed into the bathroom as Janus came back up the stairs, as this was where he'd likely head to throw up. After he'd inhaled the poison, I drowned him in the toilet and dragged his body across the hallway and dumped him in the wardrobe. I climbed down a drain pipe and came out near the front door, then headed back to Cassidy's to see what I could see. I hopped the fence to the neighbouring property and knocked out the innocent neighbour pottering in his garden shed, climbed through and managed to find my third and final clue that I'd need to successfully exfiltrate from the area. With all clues gathered, we now had the information showing that Janus was definitely meeting with the Constant about an event called the Ark Society. I watched the guards waltz back and forth in Cassidy's garden, and when I felt like the coast was clear, I hopped the fence, but unfortunately the coast was not clear and I got spotted. I knocked him out but had nowhere to dump his body body, so just had to hope that no guard decided to head round the corner. I climbed the drain pipe and knocked out another guard and then dragged him through the entire upstairs looking for a place to dump his body. I then went and knocked out the second guard and dumped his body, and then headed back downstairs in an attempt to clear the area before Cassidy returned from his neighbourhood watch. I dragged him into the garage and closed the garage door thinking nobody would ever find him, then hopped out of the window and took out the final two guards in the garden. Cassidy finally returned, and as soon as he turned his back, I knocked out his personal bodyguard and then shot Cassidy in the back of the head. I then made a break for it, exfiltrating via a bridge tunnel and then hit restart. In run 6 I got stopped by some nerd handing out flyers for the local election, and so stood around to listen to what he had to say. After a while of stumbling over his own words, he became suspicious of me, accusing me of being all up in his face. I hurried off and headed toward the back entrance of Cassidy's property, unfortunately getting spotted by a camera directly above the back door. I took everybody out and then got taken out myself. In run 7 I got to listen to the nerd's entire spiel, and it sounded like a bunch of nonsense. I then went the same way as before, but this time destroyed the camera. I headed through the gate but realised that I didn't have a melee weapon to be able to take out any guards quickly, so headed back out, picked up a frog for no reason whatsoever, and then headed into the neighbour's garden, got spotted climbing into his shed, so launched a fire extinguisher at his forehead, picked up my first clue and a can of soda, and then headed to the streets, launched the can at Cassidy's head, and then got taken out by the firing squad. In run 8 I got recorded by a camera within the first 10 seconds of the run, picked up the first clue from the garden shed along with a soda can for the melee weapon, headed through Cassidy's back door and got spotted by another camera I'd forgotten to destroy, so hit restart. In run 9, after picking up the first clue and knocking out the neighbour, I had a look around for any type of melee weapon and only found a fire extinguisher. I headed toward the garage and got spotted by a camera, headed through, knocked out the two guards, picked up the second clue, picked up the surveillance tape and destroyed the CCTV. I then headed back inside to see if I could find a way to take Cassidy out by distracting his bodyguard, but annoyingly I distracted a different guard instead. I climbed out of the window so he wouldn't see me when he came in, then climbed back in and knocked him out. I then flooded the sink again to actually bring Cassidy's bodyguard to the bathroom, but now needed to get rid of the body already sprawled across the floor. I flung him out of the window and unfortunately got spotted doing so shot the guards and then went on a bit of a rampage with my automatic rifle. I headed on over to a property that was for sale and read a note on the door by the cleaner stating the key was in the flower pot next to the door. I headed in and shot the cleaner and then headed into the basement, finding a heavily guarded vault. Not really knowing what I was doing, I headed toward the attic and found nothing useful, so headed back down and began shooting up the barbecue next door. After a while I headed out and continued the massacre under the nice autumn sun, eventually getting taken out by Janus's guards. For run 10, after picking up the first clue from the small shed and almost forgetting to shoot out the camera above Cassidy's property, I made my way inside and got spotted immediately destroying the CCTV, so hit restart. In run 11, I retrieved the clue and then headed round the front of the house to enter through the garage. I destroyed the CCTV and picked up the tape, popped the tape into the player for clue number 2, headed through Janus's basement and picked up the final clue and then headed up the main staircase. I headed into the attic, grabbed the rat poison and then saved the game before hopping out of the window just in case something went wrong. Nothing did go wrong, so I just climbed back in. I then decided to hit reload, and I'm going to be honest with you, I recorded this about 2 months ago and I have no idea why. In run 12 I dropped down and poisoned the mask and then realised the reason I reloaded the last run was because Janus entered his room before I had had a chance to poison the mask. Silly me. Once Janus had inhaled the poison, I hid on the outside of the house and followed him into the bathroom, drowned him, dumped his body in the nearby wardrobe once the guard had moved along, and then dropped into the front garden and headed back toward Cassidy. I followed him closely and then spotted a fire hydrant along the path which he took whilst out on patrol. I followed him and his bodyguard in through the garage, and I'm not entirely sure what happened, but I think the bodyguard heard me approaching and knocked him out, which alerted everyone, chased Cassidy into the living room where he looked like he was trying to fling himself out of the window, took him out and then got taken out myself. In run 13 I headed straight into the garage and picked up a wrench, which is what I would need to break the fire hydrant, and after knocking out the guards, picking up the first clue, destroying the cameras and picking up the tape, I quickly headed to the shed next door to pick up the second clue. After that I headed into the street and broke the fire hydrant, alerting a nearby civilian, headed back to the garage to pick up a car battery I'd spotted on a previous run, and then noticed Cassidy and the civilian were both heading toward the fire hydrant at the same time. I tossed the battery at his feet, but apparently he stopped short and accidentally barbecued the civilian instead of Cassidy. In run 14 I carried out the usual plan inside Cassidy's place and then picked up the car battery and headed back out in order to follow him around. I then headed back to the fire hydrant and noticed 2 civilians stood right next to it who became a little suspicious when I dropped the battery on the ground. Once they'd moved along, I cracked open the fire hydrant, and this time Cassidy was close enough that he would be the one to investigate the leak instead. I backed away and lie in wait, and nothing happened. I then realised it was because the battery hadn't been damaged, so it was just sat in a pool of water completely fine. I shot it, which did nothing except bring about my own demise. Run 15, same thing, except this time tossed the battery toward the hydrant, ensuring that when the water poured over it, whoever was stood in the puddle would fry. Annoyingly, these civilians hadn't moved along yet, and so were just stood dumbfounded by the smoking battery that had magically appeared out of nowhere. Being all about equality in the modern era, the man sent the woman to check out what was going on and then wandered off to the barbecue to eat some burgers. After this exciting development, I picked up the clues from the small shed and then headed back out to stand beside the fire hydrant waiting for Mr. Cassidy. I had to time it correctly so that he would be far enough away to not see me break the hydrant, but close enough that he would investigate the distraction. Finally, I managed to fry Cassidy and so headed off to Janice's house. I headed to the front of the house and saved the game just before opening the garage door. I knocked out the guards and crept through the house just as Janice was coming down the stairs, snuck across into the bathroom and opened the floodgates, distracting his personal bodyguard, Gunther. I grabbed Gunther from behind the door and then headed into the lounge and shot Janice in the head. I dragged him into the bathroom and left him and Gunther lying there, almost getting spotted by a guard outside. I then made my way into the attic space to play the tape, headed on over to the exit, and as soon as the tape had finished playing, even though I was like 1,000 miles away to even hear it, I walked off into the sunset. 5 stars, 10 minutes and 32 seconds, but it wasn't good enough. In run 16, I tossed the battery near the hydrant and then broke it, alerting everybody nearby, fried the civilian, and then shot Cassidy dead and hit restart. In run 17, I figured out that just by running past that couple first, it essentially triggered them to move along, meaning that when I came to electrocute Cassidy later, there wouldn't be any civilians in the way. I shot the battery thinking that I now wouldn't need to launch it, but I decided to anyway, then waited for Cassidy to get close, but because he was so far away, an old woman decided to investigate the leak instead, and I watched in despair as a nice old lady approached from the left and my target approached from the right, biting my nails as to who would get there first. The tension was palpable, but fate was on my side and Cassidy was fried and the old lady was spared. Although she wasn't spared the PTSD she'd suffer from after witnessing a man literally fry to death in front of her. I headed into the kitchen and then hit restart after alerting a nearby guard by shooting the CCTV. In run 18, everything went according to plan and I was so confident in myself that I didn't even stick around to watch Cassidy melt. I picked up the first clue from the small shed, the second clue from the abandoned property attic, then poisoned Janice's oxygen mask and then realised Janice was miles away, meaning the timings were way off, and thought that instead of waiting forever for Janice to come upstairs, if I could time it correctly, I could take him out downstairs. In run 19, I was too slow in getting to Cassidy and he would have spotted me breaking the hydrant, so I hit restart. In run 20, I took out Cassidy and picked up the first clue in the form of the letter dropped by the guard, picked up the second clue from the attic and then got spotted in the garden but decided to carry on anyway. I knocked out 2 guards in the bathroom and then shot Janice in the lounge, which was good because it meant that the timings were perfect for this run. I could take out Cassidy and Janice without having to wait for either of them. I just needed to find one more clue, so I hurried over to the small shed, picked it up and then strolled off into the sunset. In run 21, some woman saw me toss the battery in the street, so I shot her dead and then got taken out. In run 22, I took out Cassidy and then cleared the kitchen area, and upon returning to the street, I witnessed Cassidy's corpse being hiked away by his own personal bodyguard. I picked up the second clue, and as I was leaving the garden, I almost ran into the same bodyguard lugging Cassidy through the bushes. I made my way into Janice's through the garage, shot him dead, and then headed back toward the shed to pick up the last clue and then waltzed off into the sunset. Weirdly, after 22 runs, just like Miami and Mumbai, I'm not planning it this way, I swear, 22 just seems to be a lucky number, it was time to turn all the HUD options off and attempt the mission for the final time. So, without further ado, I present to you my no HUD, suit only, silent assassin, master difficulty run of Another Life.
A letter from Janus to someone called Zoe. It looks like a draft, and it's full of explicit descriptions of how unhappy Janus is with Zoe and his sister having been appointed chairwomen of the Ark Society. Huh. I've heard that name before. This is a good find, 47. A recording of some sort. The note mentions another house. Perhaps Cassidy is using one of the vacant buildings as a base of operations, 47. Nolan Cassidy is down. Good work, 47. Janus awaits your attention.
Yes, I understand. You tried to reach me earlier. There you are, my boy. Yes, well, it's about the checks.
Hey, did you drop off the surveillance tapes on Janus at the house?
I have to tell you.
Hola, señor. Feel free to taste one of our sample muffins.
I swear I have a license for it. I just don't bring it with me. You can't just confiscate my property. I need it to get rid of an aggressive...
Excellent, 47. This recording confirms that Janus is planning to meet with the Constant. This is just the sort of thing we're looking for.
At last, the actions of the first Constant catch up with him. Death feels like an easy way out for a man like Janus. Still,
Chairman of the Homeowners Association.
once.
Janus is apparently engaged in a civil lawsuit with another resident of Whittleton Creek. James Batty, the plaintiff, wants Janus to stop his annual landing of a helicopter near the local creek. Batty claims it interrupts the nesting birds and a species of frog that has been declared endangered. Must be a very important trip given his poor health.
Oh, okay, great.
Good work, 47. We now know Janus is meeting with the Constant at an event related to the Ark Society. And we have an approximate date as well. I think that's all we're going to get.
Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, then do be sure to like and subscribe to stay up to date on all future episodes. I will catch you in the next video, ready to take on 47's next mission on the sinister, secluded Isle of Scale.